All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Song Lee. I'm a professor in the Department of Bioengineering at UCLA. I also serve as the director for the Bioengineering Institute of California. And I'm glad to have you all here and industry leaders and also the co-chairs of the Industry Liaison Committee of the Bioengineering Institute of California, uh, Walt Baxter from Medtronic, in Linda Narhi from Amgen, and also as a consultant for many companies. Um, I really look forward to this wonderful panels discussion, and will hand it to Linda and Walt. And thank you all very much.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for attending. What we're going to do is have the panelists, and Walt and I are really appreciative of having four such talented and successful entrepreneurs willing to engage with the students and participate in this panel. And so we're going to have each of them. We have Melanie Matheau, Henning Thorsen, Westbrook Weaver, and Yulun Wang, and they're each going to give a brief introduction. And then so you can see what their career path was like and maybe what motivated them to go this way. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A. During the Q&A, there's two ways you can participate. You can raise your hand, and I will try and monitor that. Or you can put your question in chat, and what will be monitoring that. Because there will be multiple participants, so we do ask that, if we call on you and you're doing your question live, don't expect to be able to get in 2 or 3 follow-up questions. We really want to kind of try and limit it to a question per person. But if you have a question and all four panelists have a take on it, we'll definitely make sure that everybody gets to answer before we move on to the next one. And so with that, then I think we'd like to start it off with Henning. Would you like to start with introducing yourself, please?
Sure. I got a slide here to maybe make this a little easier to talk through. So I graduated from UCSB in 1991 and didn't have much of a clue of what I was going to do or where I was going to go, though I'd worked in the hospitals locally. So I had been thinking about a healthcare career along the way. I started at Amgen. I had a nice opportunity there. They were growing explosively. I had a couple of former roommates there already, so I got an opportunity to start my career there. Spent 15 years there. It was amazing, great foundation. Really kicked the career off well. Had an opportunity at Genentech, moved on there. And those two are really the big companies I worked at. Really enjoyed my time in that setting, learned a lot. But after about 20 years with the big companies, I decided I wanted to get into smaller companies. And my entrepreneurial spirit started to kick in. I started at Medivation a little bit after my time at Genentech, and that was my first small company experience. And I walked in the door at Genentech. I had about 70 people working for me and a couple $100 million of budget. Uh, Medivation, I had no one working for me and about $1 million of budget. So it was a big splash of cold water. Had to figure a lot of stuff out really quickly, but I learned so much, and I had the opportunity to wear a million hats. A lot of folks didn't know what they were doing there, and hey, if you were available, they'd throw a responsibility at you. So that was my first small company experience. Got acquired by Pfizer. Uh, Worked my way out of that over time and went on to Juno. I won't go through all of these. There's a lot of different experiences here, but I think the main point here is I jumped into smaller companies from that point forward. Those small companies span a lot of different technologies. There's digital therapeutics, diagnostics, med tech, and then a lot of therapeutics development along the way. I'm currently at Prothena, which is this little squiggle at the top of this list here. It's a neurodegenerative disease company that's focused on misfolded protein technologies. We also have a um, light chain amyloidosis product that's nearing, hopefully, filing with the FDA, at which point we'd be spending the next year sprinting, trying to get everything ready to commercialize, hopefully with an FDA approval. So that's kind of the inline career I've had. I would also want to mention that in between some of these companies, I have started a couple of small ventures, I've consulted quite a bit, um, done a lot of different things and explored a lot of different avenues. I'm always networking. I'm always thinking about what else could we build? What else could I take my network and how could I convert that into something that would help patients, would help people's careers, all of those types of things. So it's all come together very well. I've enjoyed it tremendously. I can give you a lot of thoughts on how to get in at various points and what's important. But with that, I think I'll hand it all over and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Henning. So, Melanie, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Melanie Matheau, and surprisingly, Henning and I share an interesting background. I'm also a UCSB grad who worked in the cottage hospital system locally for several years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. I graduated with biochemistry and molecular biology. I got so excited about chemistry while I was there, I almost double majored, pretty close, and then went on to grad school. But how I ended up in grad school, and this you'll see this kind of colors my background, is I get really curious about things and I follow through on them. That kind of leads me to my next thing. And so while I was deciding whether or not I wanted to go to graduate school or medical school, because I spent some time in the local hospitals, I was working at Stanford University for a year. I took a year off and I started going to all of their immunology lectures just to say, hey, like this is kind of a cool topic. I don't know very much about it. And that led me to seeing a video on the screen. It was the first video rate image I had ever seen of immune cells moving and talking to each other. And I immediately went back to the lab and I went, oh my God, we know nothing about immunology. How does this actually work? And I emailed the professor who built the first microscope for that lab. And I said, I'm coming to grad school. Do you have room in your lab for me? And he's like chair of the department. I didn't know any better. And he said, yeah, let's see if you can. I'm like, my GREs are fine. I'm coming. So worked with that professor for, gosh, we're still actually turning out small papers here and there, but about 7 very productive years for my PhD. And we worked on the first video rate 2-photon microscope ever built at UC Irvine. And so that was a lot of fun. From there, that took me around the world. I did a postdoc in Belgium. I came back, worked at UCSF for a bit, and had an interesting turn of events where I had a grant awarded to go on and start my own laboratory in R01. 12 hours later, I had an offer from a startup company in my inbox, and I could not decide. So that was a tough fork in the road for me, but I decided I wanted to go learn something new. So I went to the startup company. 6 months later, they had a failed clinical trial, which I was not part of, and it shut down. And so I'm sitting there going, I just turned down this career-changing grant, the golden ticket that every postdoc works for, right? What am I going to do next? And I'd had an idea while I was at UCSF around how to turn this video array 2-photon microscope into a bioprinter. And so I took the intern that I was overseeing at the startup company. I said, don't go get a new job. Come with me. I'm going to pay you out of pocket. And we bootstrapped what is now today Prellics Biologics. So Prellics Biologics I founded in 2016. It is the fastest video rate, or not video rate, fastest high resolution bioprinter in the world. It's about 10,000 times faster than the nearest neighbor competitor. And we do a lot of very interesting things with tissue engineering. And we landed on our final product, which is human lymph nodes in a dish. And we use that for discovery, immunogenicity, vaccine testing. We've done a lot of work in that. I have since gotten very curious about some of the other applications that I know Prellis won't be pursuing. And about 4 months ago, I am still on the board at Prellis, but I left my CTO position, brought in a CEO, and am now CSO at Lyric Biologics. So we're going to do high density biomanufacturing. So that's kind of my next new venture, and happy to answer any questions about that.
Awesome.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. So then I think we'll move to Westbrook, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. And appreciate everybody for the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about myself and learn a little bit from everybody else too. So my name's Westbrook. I am the founder and CEO of a company that's actually spun out of UCLA called Therapeutics. So my background is actually as a biomedical engineer. So I did my grad school at UCLA in the Department of Bioengineering, really thought that I wanted to be a professor. That was my vision for my life. Went to grad school straight out of undergrad. My vision was I was gonna, go grad school, PhD, postdoc, go be a professor, do that thing. And throughout my entire PhD, maintained that vision for myself. And honestly, just by happenstance, these things always happen sort of luck. And I think timing is everything. Just happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right people at UCLA. And it wasn't just in the Department of Bioengineering. It was bioengineering, chemical engineering, Department of Medicine, immunology, all came together to create a little invention that was basically a biomaterial, a material science technology that we eventually founded and spun Tempo out of UCLA based off of that technology. That was back in 2016. And yeah, I really had kind of a tough time kind of trying to think like, what is it that, I wanted to do? Did I want to stay in academia and continue to try and develop this very new technology? Or did I want to try and go do something else? And, I kind of thought to myself, what is it that I want to do? What gets me excited? And ultimately what I wanted to do was be able to, make something that I could actually see benefit somebody's life, even if it was just like one time, just like see that arc happen basically. And I kind of thought to myself that, you can definitely do that and continue to push technology forward in academia. And so like, I will stand here and adamantly say that that is an incredibly important pillar of what we do in industry, because, can't create something out of nothing. It has to come from somewhere, but it has been so rewarding to kind of come out of academia, go into industry, start this company. And long story short, we're in our first clinical trial in skin cancer surgery right now. We've treated 36 patients. It's wild to kind of like see that whole journey happen. We have a long way to go, but it is incredibly motivating at every step to just see how quickly you can move things. Once you get it into kind of this startup ecosystem, it's extremely challenging. I can say that I can't say if I would have made a different decision having known, how challenging it is. I enjoy that. I enjoy being challenged and being put in situations that I feel very uncomfortable in. But I think also part of not knowing how difficult it is an important thing. You kind of go into it naively and be like, yeah, we can do this. So that's my background. And in academia, I thought that that's what I wanted to do. I hit a fork in the road, decided that, this was the way that I could make a bigger difference in my opinion for what I thought I had. And we're still here working and pushing and excited to be in the clinical stage. Again, long road ahead. I've been very lucky to build a good group of people around me, especially being a first-time CEO coming out of academia. Like nobody believes that you have any idea what you're doing, which is partially true. Yeah, and I'm happy to answer about, any of the questions from sort of like, I'm sure there will be many about like, okay, you were a postdoc and now you're a CEO, like what happens? What are the steps? What are the pitfalls? There's so many, but very excited to be able to answer people's questions about that.
Great, thank you very much. And then finally, Yulun, I know you have a long and really distinguished career path, so try and condense it. But
no, thank you, Linda and Walt. Just by way of background, so Yulun Wang. I have a PhD from UC Santa Barbara. We got 3 gauchos on here in computer and electrical engineering, and I specialize in robotics. Is what I did. I hit my fork early in terms of the decision between academia versus industry, because right out of the PhD, so my father was a professor at Berkeley, and so there was definitely a pull in the academic direction. But I decided, for whatever reason, I don't know why, that I wanted to build products as opposed to write papers. And so that's what I did. I started my first company. It was called Computer Motion. That started in 1990. It was the first company to do surgical robots. And then actually that company went public in 97, and then it ended up merging with a company called Intuitive Surgical in 2003. And, Intuitive Surgical's grown up to become a pretty significant company. They're over $200 billion market value. They do over 2 million surgeries a year now. My wife's been operated on by the Da Vinci robot. I have many friends. Probably many of you probably don't have to look very far to find someone who's been hopefully positively impacted by surgical robots. But so my company merged with Intuitive in 2003. Before that happened, I led a project where a surgeon sat in New York City and he operated on a patient in Strasbourg, France. That was done in 2001, September 7th, 2001. It's called the Lindbergh operation. And so when my company, Computer Motion, became part of Intuitive, that procedure stuck in my head. And I thought it wasn't time yet for telesurgery, but telemedicine made sense. So I started a company called InTouch Health. And InTouch Health started in 2003. It became the largest supplier of telemedicine technology to hospitals and health systems. We were in about 3,000 hospitals at the time when we were acquired by a company called Teladoc, which is a publicly listed company. And when you start a company and you have venture capital, you need a liquidity path, and it's either going public or getting bought. And so the first one went public. The second one was bought by Teladoc. And today, Teladoc does 40 to 50,000 telemedicine consults a day. That's kind of the volume that's going through that business. And then what happened is, so that would happen in 2020. Then in 2021, I decided that this telesurgery, it was time for that to become that the market was ready for that. So I started a new company called Sovato, which is where I am today. And the idea is really putting together the two early parts of my career, the surgical robots and the telemedicine. And now we are going after remote surgery. And so this is still an early stage company. We're after seed Series A. We're kind of moving towards a Series B type of level organization. But so it's I enjoy the entrepreneurial kind of journey. I enjoy kind of cutting edge stuff. But anyway, that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. All right, so I think we'll start the Q&A. So if anyone wants to raise their hand or put it in chat, that would be great. Yeah. Here. So I see one person put it in the Q&A, which is maybe even better. What do you recommend someone do if they've never started a company and have no industry experience, but have somewhat of a product already and would like to start it, like a medical device? So, how do you help somebody start from the ground up?
I'd be happy to start on that. So I think, one thing that was kind of my starting. In fact, many of the panelists here, we started on the technical side, and then had to kind of go from there. And the technical side and a new product is clearly a foundational step in the process, but all the business and all of the other stuff is foundational as well. And oftentimes, I think that people don't fully appreciate that. So you need to somehow get the expertise around you, which covers what a company needs. And that expertise is in a broad sense, it's the business side compared to the technical side and a specific product. And then I'll say one more thing, and then I'll pass it on. If the need is to raise capital, okay, which often it is, hopefully not. The further you can go without raising investment capital, the better. But if you do need to raise investment capital, one of my first mentors, he taught me this lesson, which I use all the time to this day. You got all these people running around saying, "Hey, I got the best idea in the world. If someone gave me some money, I'd make them gazillionaires." Simultaneously, you have people running around saying, "God, I got so much money. I don't know what to do with it." So how can that exist? How can there be so much money out there, so many great ideas, and people not knowing, the other side? And the bridge between the monies and the ideas is confidence. And once you can establish confidence, then the money starts flowing into the ideas. And that's a multi-dimensional thing, which we can unpack at some later time. But that's what your goal is to get the right people to have confidence in your idea. I'll stop.
Could not agree more with that with those statements. I can maybe add to it just a little bit. I mean, I think that question like really is very similar to what my arc was, because by definition, I was a technical guy, PhD in the lab every day, started a company, became the CEO, had zero experience, right? So that definitely a challenging uphill. And frankly, the biggest challenge is that there are so many things that you don't know. And still, even for me, every step that I get to, I've never been there before, right? So it's always going to be a challenge. And I won't be able to bring that intuition to it because I don't have it yet. And so that's always going to be a challenge when you're trying to externally communicate anything about your company, whether it's to investors, whether it's to potential users, whether it's to people that you want to hire, right? This is all a sales process to everybody. So what I would say, and what was very helpful for me, is because I started off technically and we had a technology that we had created. We made a hammer, right? And then they're like, all right, let's go find some nails, right? But I think what was very effective for us is really taking time to sit down and strategically think about what is the right problem to solve with the tool that we have. Because you can't solve every problem, right? Even if you have something that could be truly, I'm going to air quotes this, platform technology, right? You can't solve every problem with it. And you have to find the right problem to solve and really focus in on that. It doesn't mean that you have to lose the aspect of the other things that you can solve, maybe, right? As like a great potential upside. But you have to focus in on what the problem is. And so what I did that was very helpful for me and helped me grow the story of Tempo and help communicate that well is focus in on meeting and immersing myself with people that are associated with the problem. So for us, it's non-melanoma skin cancer and the surgeries related to that and the outcomes of those surgeries. So I just started immersing myself with dermatologic surgeons, getting to know them, going to conferences, talking to them, like what problems do you have? What's not working in your practice? What kind of patients do you see that you feel like you can't do what you want to for those patients, right? And really start to understand ultimately the customer, right? And get yourself immersed with the customer. Be very critical of yourself when you're thinking, okay, here's my hypothesis of what the problem is, because everything is centered around that, the problem, and then therefore the opportunity associated with being able to solve that problem. And then your technology or product comes in as, a differentiator for your company to solve that problem. It doesn't necessarily have to be based around just the product or just the technology. It's like the arc of the problem, and then I'm going to solve it, and I'm going to have a competitive advantage because of my thing that I have. That's what I would say.
I'd like to piggyback on the confidence being key and communication being key. So really being able to communicate your idea, because it's going to be new. It's going to be brand new, and you're going to have to understand how you differentiate yourself from other competitors in the market. And I think there are a lot of different ways you can start a company, and I won't say one is right or wrong, but I can give you guys some insight into my path. And that was, I had a sketch on some pieces of paper and some academic papers to back up that this idea would work. And, we pitched to angel groups, we pitched to different groups. We started to try to understand our market and whatnot. And what we ultimately ended up doing was applying for accelerator programs. And we chose the accelerator program. We were accepted into 2, and we chose one that had lab space for us because we'd filed our patents. And there's a ticking time when you file your patents, when you can go in a year later and file the whole thing with some proof of concept. And we needed to build our laser-based printer really fast. So that's what we ended up doing. And I agree also that you should surround yourself with some business expertise. It's great if you can have a co-founder who understands that aspect of starting a company. But I would say it's not necessary. I imagine we've got some pretty smart technical people in the room. And I did a lot of reading of these books. And in the accelerator programs, the people that they take a decent chunk of your company. It is great if you don't have to raise money, but that's what we did. And but in compensation for that, you get all sorts of business training, all sorts of pitch training. You refine your deck. You get to pre-meet all different VCs. You get to bounce your ideas off of them. And I found that to be really valuable as a first-time founder and CEO.
Yeah, and I would only add to all of those great points that depending on what it is you're producing, your product or what kind of a business or company you're trying to put together, you need to be open-minded about, as everyone's mentioned, including an operator, including someone or getting, at least feedback that gives you visibility to the potholes that are going to be in front of you. I have personally engaged with a few who made mistakes along the way and didn't realize that this fantastic product that would have helped ovarian cancer patients is not ever going to have a market because guess what? Pfizer has a product 2 years ahead of theirs with a better profile. And if you're going to go waste your time and money, you could do that, but you need to do your homework. Um, and you also need to understand the business components of it. So that operator side, the business side, someone who really understands the marketplace can be absolutely invaluable in ensuring that you don't make missteps early on and that you truly understand the value of your asset as you try to fundraise and paint the picture. Uh, so that would be what I would suggest everyone consider.
Hey, can I just add one point on top of that? I think the point everyone agrees that you need to bring in the business expertise. It does not mean you have to give the company to the business person to run.
No, no.
Definitely not. Okay. So it means you just need that, right? I think, Melanie, it sounds like what you did is you brought expertise which was funneled into your brain, which is a very valid way to do it. It sounds like that's what Westbrook did as well, which is perfect.
Yeah, I guess when you start a company, you have no money, but you do have other things that you can, utilize to motivate people and buy people in, which can be, advisory agreements where people can vest equity, vest options in the company. I mean, look, you got to give some stuff up to get some stuff, right? And the way you got to think about it is, would I rather have, a percent of something valuable or 100% of nothing, right? So you got to look at it that way. Don't be giving things away, right? You want to make sure that you create agreements where, you have control and you're going to make sure that people are delivering, things for you. But advisory agreements that can often grow into, full-time employees in my experience. And then also just like, you got to be able to listen to what people are telling you. The feedback is going to be brutal, but you just gotta listen to it and try to take the positive out of everything that you hear and use it to grow a little bit. But it's gonna be brutal. People aren't gonna sugarcoat it, but they shouldn't. And if they did, then you would be not learning anything from it. That's what I would say.
Linda, we have 6 fantastic questions coming in. They keep rolling in. Keep them coming, everybody. We appreciate that. But do you want to pick one, Linda, to read?
So there's one that's pretty specific and might be, but I've heard it a lot from a lot of the undergrads. I'm an adjunct professor at UCSB, so I also get some student interactions too, right? And it's just, what kind of advice would you give the students about going to try and get an industry internship versus getting a research internship in the university? Is one of those more valuable? Does it really matter in the beginning of your career path, especially if you're like an undergrad?
So I personally did several research internships, and I found those valuable to me personally because they brought me into labs that were not my specialty, and they gave me a bit of a background and a confidence in areas that I've been able to draw on as an inventor and a startup founder. And I think it's always confidence building to know that you can step into something new and learn a little bit about it, maybe just enough to be dangerous with a new invention. And I think that was highly valuable to me as a young undergraduate.
In my experience, I was able to do both, not obviously at the same time, but like different summers do different things. I would say so. I was able to be an unpaid intern at a medical device startup when I was an undergrad. A company called iDev Technologies that actually ended up getting bought by Abbott later. They had a cool woven stent that could go behind the knee and bend a lot. But I got exposure to so many things while I was there because it was like a 15-person startup at the time. And I mean, I was like a I was probably sophomore going into junior year, biomedical engineering undergrad, and just got exposure to just anything. Like one day I'd be hanging out with the VP of sales and marketing, and the other day I'd be like in the lab doing a test on something. And to me, it helped me, if only helped me understand that like that's actually a thing that happens, like that's possible, like that you can do that. I think that was really interesting for me and something that I took with me all the way through grad school, and probably something that helped me kind of tip over to be like, oh yeah, people do this. Like you can actually go start a company. Like it can be done. Is it going to be pretty? No. Are you going to be in a room with no windows? Of course you are, but like it's going to be fun and you can do it. So
I think they're both valuable, and so I don't think I think it's a little bit circumstantial in terms of which one ends up being more important. But I think internships are great.
Yeah, same here. I wouldn't weigh one over the other unless circumstances dictated it.
agreed.
Or maybe if one of the topics is more of interest to you than the other. Or I think Melanie had a really good point that taking an internship in something you don't know anything about is actually a really good way to learn that field too.
Absolutely.
We have one person who raised their hand. So I think, I hope that they can unmute themselves, but, and I'm probably not going to say your name right, but, so Kanish Gray, if you want to ask your question, that would be great.
Yeah, let's make sure we've got them alive.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, I hope I'm audible now.
Yes.
Perfect.
Perfect. That was also a perfect pronunciation of my name. Thank you so much, Linda. We have some amazing people. I have a relatively specific question because I've been attending VC meetings and, from the investors side, right? Where companies would present and I would be there as like an advisor to the investors, the technical guy. And this is something that comes up a lot. So as technical people, we tend to have backup ideas, right? We have a lot of ideas. Hey, if this doesn't work, that's going to work. If that doesn't work, something else will. But when investors ask specific questions like, what is your go-to-market strategy? Or what are you going to do if the FDA approval doesn't come through? What I want to ask the experts here is, how would you recommend we as CEOs answer that question? Do we give them all of the possibilities, or do we just be very specific?
Well, to me, you have to give a balanced answer on that. And a big part of it is what I was referring to a little bit earlier, which is really understanding the marketplace, where your product would fit, and what the competitive dynamics might be. The valuation of the product, the chances of success, all of that are going to be woven around your story, but it's got to be grounded in a lot of those things. So I think overall, you're asking more about the balance piece. I have always, in that setting, given the full market view and the mapping that I've usually paid someone to do or had a team do. But I've also given the competitive landscape. There's 3 companies working on a similar product. They're all launching within 2 years of what we're working on, that kind of thing. And any other important component that has to be revealed or discussed.
Yeah, that's a tricky. I agree, Henning, and I think also that's a tricky question because it is dependent upon the specific question. I mean, go-to-market strategy is something very different than what happens if you don't hit your endpoint in your clinical trial. But I would say that what I try to avoid in both storytelling and in both strategy, like development, is to avoid binaries. I try to avoid situations where it's like, all right, here we go, all in. And if it works, we're golden. If it doesn't work, pack it up and go home. I try to avoid situations like that. Now, is it, you can't always avoid those. Sometimes you get into these sort of pinch points, but when you're telling a story to investors or anyone, it is important in the way that you tell the story to try and avoid making those potential pinch points very obvious, I guess, if that's a fair thing to say, right? So And it can even come down to the way that you're talking about designing clinical trials. These things happen in phases. You don't just jump straight to the end for good reason. So I think by kind of telling those very deliberate, well thought out stories, which again, to Henning's point, all comes from the kind of the market story, which is here's the problem, here's the patients, here's what the competitive landscape is, here's how we think our value proposition can fit in, and then everything kind of comes back to that, and just trying to tell that story in a way that doesn't set you up for a binary win-lose.
Yeah, so everything I've worked on so far has been platform companies. So of course we have backup ideas upon backup ideas and different applications for our platform. But I think it is important to focus really on what your story is around your first application if you have a platform technology that you're thinking of. And everything that everyone said here is absolutely right. You need good market analysis, global, what you think your global, local, what you think your market penetration will be, how elastic the market is. That's something I've started to build into my presentation. So if you flood the market with a lot of new inexpensive product, you get to keep your pricing the same. The VCs are often interested in that. And then of course downside risk analysis, FDA analysis, etc., and then competitive landscape analysis. If you have those three elements, the story should hopefully tell itself. And then you can dig deeper in there with other VCs. Every VC has a different set of questions in my experience, but those usually, if you hit those three big ones, you usually get pretty far.
I guess the only thing I'd add to what's already been said is, a couple of points. One is stage of the company dictates very much those answers. If you're in an early seed stage, and they say what's your go-to-market strategy, and you're 5 years away, all they're testing for is, do you know how to speak that speak? Okay. If you're launching the product and you're doing a late round and they ask that question, you better know exactly kind of how you're rolling it out. One thing that, in the venture capital world, what they're evaluating is people, product, market in that order. They're first and foremost investing in people, because inevitably you're going to hit twists and turns from your market. And the question is, how well do you adapt given the barriers that you run, the unforeseen barriers? So a lot of those questions it's not even so much the specific answer, it's how you answer and how you think about things. And do you have the experience to think about these things holistically? That's actually what they're testing for. And that goes back to the concept of having, business help, whether it's an advisor, a board member, or partner, or whatever. Those are what's how to mitigate for those things.
Walt, why don't you pick one of the next questions from the Q&A?
Boy, is that one a tough one, but I tell you, one that just rolled in, the last one here by the anonymous attendee. If I ultimately want to have a lead scientific position at a biotech company doing drug development, which, man, is that specific? Good for you. Is it necessary to get my PhD? This is a question that we get a lot from the undergraduate crowd. We probably got a good mix of graduate and undergraduate students here. I hear so many mixed opinions about graduate degrees in industry, and I don't want to waste time when I could otherwise be working. So I'll toss that out to anybody. Melanie, you want to start that one maybe, or anyone?
I may not be the best person to answer this because I haven't worked at a large biopharma company. I kind of just started my own. So in my experience, it is typically a PhD, or maybe just if you're really brilliant masters leading a group. That's typically what I've seen, but I'm sure there's some other answers that have more experience behind them.
Thank you. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I can give my perspective on it. I'm more on the business and commercial side of the equation today, but early in my career, I was in R&D, and at the bigger companies, you absolutely have to have that graduate degree. There was no career pathing for anyone who didn't have the resume and the experience. Very rarely did folks, not that you couldn't get into the company and start your career, but to move up within R&D, highly unlikely you're going to get very far. And that was true in research, development, you name it, across every science area in the company. That was very much the case. So that's been my experience. I don't know, uh, Westbrook, Walt, anybody else?
Well, so again, my experience in of one over here, right? Because I started a company straight out of grad school, and that's what I have experience with. But I do get exposed, right, to a lot of other companies of varying sizes, whether or not it's just through networking down here in San Diego, which is where I live now, and or always trying to talk with potential strategic partners, so you kind of get really into these bigger companies and understand who's doing what. And I agree with Henning and with Melanie that in my experience, I haven't seen anyone in a senior level within R&D that didn't have at least a master's, but really mostly PhD level. I think that in the R&D component of the business, so much like experience is required to manage people, to think strategically, and honestly, like just the grit that comes with doing a PhD. I mean, my goodness, it like changes you. So I would say that in my view, that would be very important if that's what your goal is to become high up. If we're talking chief, like C-suite, VP, even like sort of like a senior director level, you probably would need. It would really benefit you to have a PhD. Let's just say that. I can't say you need it. But.
So I think I have a slightly different experience from Amgen. And if you want to stay in R&D, absolutely. But in the process development side of things and in the operations side of things, we had a lot of senior vice presidents who did not have their PhDs. And we actually, for a very short time, had a research VP who did not have his PhD, but he was absolutely brilliant. So that was maybe an exception. But so I think it partly depends on, I think it depends on how quickly you want to jumpstart things, right? If you start in with a master's or a BS, it's going to take you longer to get up to the place where people will see you enough to know if you have the talent to go in that direction. But I also agree with the grit thing, right? One of the things we noticed was if we were hiring someone who didn't have their PhD, you were going to have to teach them how to take not always constructive criticism, but important criticism, which I think you guys have mentioned, how important that is as well. And also the communication piece, right? A lot of what we learn when we're getting our PhDs is how to write and present science. So it sounds to me like maybe for the entrepreneur area, it might be even more important because some of those other skills outside of the lab are actually part of what we learn when we get our doctorate. But it is possible to not have it and be successful. I know some examples of that.
Yeah, I can move on to another one. I just say the med tech world is a little different. That's all I'll say about the PhD versus non. We do see a lot of leaders in med tech who are undergraduate, maybe with some additional business training. And actually that leads to Kirby Johnson's question. Thanks, Kirby. Would you recommend business school for someone with an engineering undergraduate background who wants to eventually transition into kind of the business side of industry? Or are there other paths that might be just as effective? Yulun, you can take this one. I know. Yeah.
So I've actually never taken a business class in my life.
Right.
And so my guess is my colleagues on here may not have either from hearing about their backgrounds. So we have 0 for 4 in terms of that. I do think that I don't frown on MBAs at all. I think those are great, and there's nothing wrong with them. I'm sure they're very helpful. They're certainly not necessary to do the entrepreneurial side. I think back to the earlier question about kind of elevating in big companies. I think the MBA sometimes helps on that side, moving up through the ranks of, not research areas, but the operation side, commercial side, et cetera.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, being far more steeped in the business side of the equation over the last 20 years. It's evolved a bit. And when I was at Amgen early on, they actually did a lot to get you into MBA programs. They'd pay for it, they'd give you time to do it. It was actually a really important part of moving your career along across the company, but very pronounced on the business side and sales and marketing. Now, I don't really see that being the case, honestly. That it doesn't hurt, and it can help. But I I know I'd say probably the vast majority of commercial leaders that I know these days, I shouldn't say vast, but a good number do not have MBAs. Many have PharmDs, many have science degrees, master's and PhD level science degrees and MDs. Those, I think, over time have become more important and more marketable in the leadership roles when you think about drug development broadly. So I would say MBAs, yeah, they're good things and that's worthwhile. I wouldn't look at it as something that's a litmus test to get a lot of different roles. My experience.
And
Yeah, I can share the experience of my co-founder who went to get his MBA from Amgen. Actually, Amgen did fund it for him. And he went to Stanford Business School and came out and has had a couple leadership programs or positions in startup companies and really enjoyed it. And he worked briefly also for a venture firm. And so he came with a bio background, went to Amgen for a little bit, worked his way up, and then went into an MBA program from there. And I would say from the outside kind of looking in is as to what that may have benefited him that in skills that I would love to build up in the same way is that he has a much easier time walking potential VCs through all of the product market fit, the market research, the big spreadsheets that we build out, all sorts of things like that. So that comes more naturally to him in terms of like VC relationships and communications. So I think there's definitely a benefit, but I don't think it's necessary.
And I think you bring up a really good point of the value of it in the um, entrepreneurial startup setting versus in the large corporate environment. Um, Walt, I don't know if you have a different experience in med tech, but yeah, I just haven't seen it have the same kind of value it used to.
Yes, we see plenty of MBAs in a large company like Medtronic, obviously, but they tend to be complemented with a technical scientific background, very similar to what you all are saying here. Speaking with friends and colleagues who've invested the time, it's such a nice training and kind of the overview of the business world. I hear frequently, wait to do it, right? Learn a little bit about the business first, the school of hard knocks, and then do it. That's some advice I've gotten, but definitely worthwhile, not necessary. Totally agree.
I think a large percentage of people in venture capital, they have MBAs.
Yep.
Obviously investment banking, very high percentage MBAs. So that's kind of a different pathway.
Agreed. Just remarking that we've probably got a couple of handfuls of fantastic faculty from across the University of California tonight, including Rob McKee, he's a faculty member at UC Riverside. Rob writes in to say, how do you think engineering curricula can better prepare students, both undergraduate and graduate, for these sorts of startup entrepreneurial roles that we're talking about here tonight? And any of you can take that one.
I have a very quick answer for that. Communicating to non-specialists, that you just need to practice that over and over again.
Yeah, I'd also add there should be more, and I speak at UCSB on this occasionally, but healthcare market knowledge, understanding the US healthcare market and how healthcare works. And then outside of the US, that's a huge blank spot for most people walking into bigger companies. They just don't even understand reimbursement, the regulatory environment, all of those components. I think that would be a very valuable add.
I would agree with that.
I guess one thing I would suggest is a seminar class where you have lots of different people from different walks of life come and teach. I've always thought, engineering sometimes is kind of dry, especially at the undergraduate level. You got to give the students some incentives in terms of what it could become.
So that's a nice segue into some of what the Industrial Liaison Committee is trying to do, actually, is to get better connections between faculty and industrial scientists who are happy to support them, including in curriculum development. But also, there's for the capstone class now at UCLA, the professor who's teaching it actually has topics she likes speakers on and invites different people to come so that the students are learning from folks who are actually working in that area. And I think that's something that will be one of our goals moving forward, is to help enable those classes at the different campuses if we can. And I already mentioned that y'all are going to be hit up for that. We're getting close to the end of time. We have time for a couple more questions, but I did just want to say that the speakers have all agreed that if your question doesn't get answered, you could reach out to them on LinkedIn, and they're happy to interact with you that way. And I really want to thank you all for that, because that's really a generous gift of your time to the students and faculty who might be interested in that. We really appreciate it. So I would encourage the attendees, if you don't get your question answered, or you have other questions, to really take advantage of that opportunity.
Hey, speaking of the University of California, Elliot McConney, and Elliot, I'm really sorry if I mispronounced your name, brings up another important thing that many of our campuses provide, and that is what accelerators would you recommend to first-time startup founders in biomedical device technology? Some of our campuses host these kind of gathering places for investors and inventors to come together. Anybody have any advice about that?
I have one. MedTech Innovator. If you haven't heard of it, go look it up. It's actually I'm not sure if it's fully based, but it's definitely based pretty strongly in Los Angeles. It's awesome. It's great. Even if you're not at the point to where you apply, you don't get in, they have a lot of stuff that you can go see, you can go watch. They have kind of like a cohort every year of companies that get to work in this, and they present. You can go see how they present. It's very cool. And I would say that that's a good one for med device.
I see my friend and faculty member from UC Irvine on the call, Abe Lee. So I better put in the chat a link to UC Irvine's Cove gathering spot for innovators and entrepreneurs just off campus there. If you haven't had a chance to see that, that's another University of California based place where students can come and watch people pitch ideas and get a feel for how that happens if you haven't had a chance to do that. So,
and there's even a fund associated with that. There's the Cove Fund.
That's right. That's right. I know UCI is not alone, but I happen to know about that one, so I'll just put that in the chat there. Let's see. Linda, do you have a favorite?
I was looking at the one question from Austin Dubose that says they have a patent which is currently owned by UCSB and Northwestern, and now they want to move forward with the startup at Northwestern centered around this, which is in neurodegenerative diseases. And they're curious about what the next best steps were to go from having a patent to establishing a company.
So I have some strong points of view on that. So firstly, the question was patent. So in other words, the patent's already been issued, or they're in the process of wanting to get a patent.
It says it is currently owned by UCSB Northwestern.
Okay, so therefore it's an issued patent.
I would assume.
So the thing which I believe, if you're starting a company, what often the UC system, the first conversation they have with you is, what's my royalty? I hate that conversation. I think the question, what the negotiation should be about some equity in the company, as opposed to, there should be zero royalty. And so I think that, I think it's very valid to go, to basically work to license that patent exclusively and give them a piece of the company. And then actually they're all on the same side, and they're actually, then they become supportive. They're on your cap table. They're a shareholder of your company, and they should be helping you as you move that journey along, as opposed to a royalty is kind of a parasitic relationship, in my opinion.
Will you negotiate my next deal? Because that's tough. It's really tough to get a university to do that. So don't feel bad if that doesn't
I
happen.
think that, so the way the royalty happens is if a Medtronic or an Amgen comes in, then they say royalty, and that's okay. Because, you're not going to work with equity when Medtronic, Amgen and stuff. But in an early stage, I think it's a very different conversation. This is really what made Stanford the way it is basically they took equity in these startups, which turned into billions and billions and billions of dollars. So that's what I would suggest.
The better way to do it. Yeah. And a lot of the law firms, the big law firms, Cooley, DLA Piper, Wilson Sonsini, like global law firms will give a new startup company a lot of deferred costs work. And so they'll incorporate you, they'll help you negotiate that license while you're building your deck to pitch to investors.
So I guess in the specifics to answer the question in this order, get an attorney, make sure that you have an agreement with them where you can defer the costs. And then you're going to have to go through a pretty painful negotiation, honestly, with the university to make sure that you have enough coverage for yourself. But that can also happen in stages. You don't have to get straight to a license. You could get to an LOI, like a letter of intent or some sort of like exclusive right to do something. But you got to have some exclusivity and you got to have some coverage for yourself. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I wouldn't add much to that. I went through this relatively recently and get an attorney.
It's worth its weight. Promise you. It's not going to feel good, but it's going to be worth it.
Yeah, I think we would point out that this group hosted a legal careers panel 6 months ago. So we've covered both ends of the attorneys world.
Yeah.
Linda, if we've got time for one more, there is another provocative.
Yeah, let's do one more. I think we're okay.
Last one from anonymous attendee, another sticky situation. We see students who get into a senior design situation that kind of lingers beyond undergrad years, and then suddenly becomes quasi-successful, right? So what do you do then? And so this person asks, do you think it's a good idea to work in a bigger biotech company, so they got a job, while developing a product from a startup company on the side after hours? Sounds like a lot of fun and no sleep. And then the person says, I am applying to SBIR grants, not sure if we'll get it, but I graduate from my PhD this summer and I'm looking for a full-time job. I don't know if you have any advice for this person, anyone here?
I guess I'll start by saying that, you're better off not raising money and going as far as you can without raising capital. Having said that, if you need to raise money, no institutional venture capitalist is going to give you money if you're working a full-time job somewhere else and then doing this on the side. And so at that point in time, you're going to need to make the difficult decision of going all in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, if you're applying for SBIRs and you're willing to kind of wait and have a job, well, that's maybe coming through or not, that's probably okay. But I'm a person with a lot of energy and I found it all consuming to build a startup company from scratch. There was no way I could have held another job and done it. And, 16-hour days plus. So it's not something that's easy to do well if you're going to try to do both.
And I think you'll find if you start a full-time job at a company that they expect you to work 60 hours a week also, right? So it's not like you can say, well, I'm just going to squeak by and do a minimum here while I put other things there. Is there any issues with like legal issues if you're working full-time with a company and then you're doing something on the side to make sure they stay separate from each other?
Yeah, you need to make sure they're very separate. Yeah, there can be.
Yeah, especially if the areas are like kind of overlapping, it's going to be hard to say that, well, I use this half of my brain to do this and this half of my brain to do that. It's going to be very, very challenging.
Read the employee agreement very carefully because it's, and it's there for a reason, right? Having conflicts of interest is just not the way you want to live. Be open and transparent with your boss. Let her know what you're up to. She'll have good advice for you too.
Yeah,
and make sure you're not using any company resources at all. Yeah.
I wouldn't do it personally. I do know people who do this later in their career. It's more palatable at that point. Again, you got to get an attorney. It's that would be an important step there as well. But yeah, I would vote no on that.
So it sounds like the consensus advice is actually, if you really want to do a startup, go all in on it, give it all your energy, and see if it works or not. Don't try and be split.
Yes, and I would add, I want to try to understand from the person's perspective, like if you're going to graduate and then you're not going to have a position after that, like you can't not eat, right? So you got to go do something, and then the grant cycle is just, hellish, right? It's so slow. It takes a long time. You don't know what's going to happen. So can totally understand it from that position. I guess if it was me, what I would try to do is see if I could just like stay on in my current lab as like a postdoc or as like a scientist, like an associate scientist or something, to get a paycheck, right? And then see if you can see the SBIR thing through. And if that hits, go, right? And if not, then you could, bail, basically.
Or maybe even try and get a job as an instructor, even at a community college or something, right?
Exactly.
But you're not compromising the science part.
Yeah.
Well, we are 5 minutes over. So I would like to really thank all of the panelists and the participants for the excellent questions. And on my part, I actually have to thank my former Amgen colleagues who are at an analytical startup called Biotherapeutic Solutions, who actually let me do this from their office because there's no power at my house today. So I couldn't have done it otherwise. We're in the public safety power shutoff region of Ventura County right now. So, and maybe next time when we do this, actually I'll have Da participate as a startup entrepreneur if his venture works also. So thank you so much for everyone, and Song and Abe and other folks that actually are the leaders for the BIC. Walt and I want to also say, thank you for partnering with us to really give us these opportunities to have increase the interactions between industry and faculty and students in the UC system. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for all the great questions, everyone. It was
Yes,
a joy.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Everybody have a great night.
Thank you.